Good morning. Just be a few moments before we get started. If you have any questions, go ahead and add them to the comment section. Okay, good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thanks for joining me again this week. Happy Lunar New Year. Welcome to the Year of the Ox. This is our 48th installment of the weekly virtual office hour address. And so people say they continue to appreciate these live stream addresses and hearing from their mayor. So I'll continue to do them in as far as the near future is concerned. This live stream event is really great because it allows me to give you some updates, answer some of your questions, and just provide some general words of encouragement. Thanks for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during ever-changing times. I hope everyone is doing well, staying healthy. Please remember to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. This fatigue of staying at home has been difficult for so many of us. And we're seeing at least better numbers, but remember, just keep following the county health orders. Do your part to stop the spread of the virus. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, reduce the number of people you come in contact with, maintain safe social distancing when you're out, and of course, continue to wear your mask. It really helps. It's mandatory. And the CDC's latest info is, double masking is even safer. So, whatever you can do, you could be a carrier of the virus. Someone you could meet could be a carrier and be asymptomatic, not showing any symptoms. And the mask is the best way to prevent spread of that virus. So we've now reached 333 days since after the March 16th county health order started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. And since that declaration, a lot has happened. More happens almost every day. I have press conferences to watch, seminars to attend, conference calls to confer and advocate on your behalf. And it's busy times, but I think we do see a light at the end of the tunnel. We're still in that tunnel, but we are seeing progress being made on multiple fronts. So let's go ahead and talk about what's happened at a federal, state, county, and city level over the last 2 weeks. So last Monday, the city held the Moffett Park Specific Plan Transportation Infrastructure Workshop. So this was a study session. This was the second of 3 sessions. The first one was on the environment and sea level rise. The second one was this past one was on transportation and infrastructure, and then the last one, which will happen at the beginning of next month, will be on land use, zoning, and operations. And we'll talk a little bit about that date a little bit later. But looking at infrastructure and transportation options, the last meeting, I think it was very useful. It's trying to figure out how to make it more walkable, bikeable, how to move people in and out of Moffett Park better. And so there's been a lot of focus on improving the east and west channels, looking at conceivably the people mover and everything else that other options to get people from like downtown Sunnyvale into downtown into Moffett Park. And I said to me that is one of the big things is as we add more conceivable housing out there, retail, and additional office space, it's how to make sure that that's a viable community, and making it as pedestrian friendly, as bike friendly as possible. Only make sure that alternate active transportation is being used in that community. Last Tuesday, council had a meeting, and it started with a study session on the Mary overpass. And so this is been part of the city plan for since the 70s. And so this is looking at the environmental impact report and kind of a preferred plan. So we got feedback from the city staff on what the alternatives are, heard from our residents, and then gave a little bit direction because it used to be we were already planning to study all 5 options from an EIR, 4 lanes of traffic over as the Mary overcrossing is concerned, plus bike and ped, 2 lanes plus bike and ped, 2 lanes HOV, bike and ped only, or no project. But there's been new state laws that we actually have to choose a preferred evaluation plan, even though we're evaluating all 5 options. But we need to choose a preferred, and so we gave a little direction to staff as far as preferred is concerned. Last Tuesday, we also celebrated Black History Month. So February is Black History Month. This year is the 45th anniversary of the official declaration, the first declaration of the month of February as Black History Month. And so it was good to honor the contributions and sacrifices of our African Americans. And, the Sunnyvale will have a Black History Month celebration with stories and music on Thursday, February 25th at 7 p.m. So you can visit the City Library website for more details on that and how to register. We spent the majority of the meeting talking about redistricting. And so, we had our first, about a year ago, we moved to districts. So we had something on the ballot to move the city to 6 districts plus a directly elected mayor, myself. But we ended up having our first district elections in November. And then ultimately, because of 2020 was the census, we'll be getting the census data back later this year. We need to then redistrict the city based upon that census data. And so there was a lot of feedback on the kind of the different topics, whether or not it's a fully independent redistricting commission, whether it's not a hybrid, whether or not it's council doing it on their own. Ultimately, you look at what we did for the last districting, everything was, we had residents giving us proposals, but ultimately all the choices, all the kind of the whittling down of the 20 plus maps to 15 maps to 10 maps to 3 maps to the final map was pretty much done by council. And so we talked a little bit about the ordinance that will establish that process for redistricting. And staff gave kind of a timeline of different meetings, outreach that would go on this year. And council ultimately, there's a little dissension amongst council, but we ultimately chose kind of a hybrid focus from a redistricting standpoint. And so some of the things that that hybrid commission, we basically choose, council will select a group of 7 residents plus 3 alternates that would then be working with the community to define what those maps are. The commission would then, that committee would then bring 3 to 5 maps back to council based upon the census data with a preferred option. And then And there'll be a large community outreach planned and all that for residents to take part, to give feedback, and then council would choose one of those conceivably 3 to 5 maps. Last Wednesday, it was announced that CVS pharmacies in the Bay Area would be providing the vaccine, and they initially said Sonoma, San Francisco, and Sunnyvale were the 3 locations. And you know, we're trying to get the COVID vaccine through as many sources as possible to make it as easy as possible to get vaccinated. And that was going to be being put in place for getting appointments as of February 11th. And it needs to follow all the state laws as far as 65 and older, or a healthcare worker, frontline worker. However, when it went live yesterday, for some reason, Sunnyvale's CVS was not listed, although Santa Clara and Mountain View CVS's are listed there. So I'm still trying to get more information on that. That being said, there's been a lot more movement on vaccinations over the last week, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Last Thursday, Santa Clara County Health announced a new policy, no wrong door. And so the no wrong door policy, I think, is the right way to go. Basically, it's defining that no matter what your healthcare provider is, you can go anywhere in the county to get your vaccination. And so, roughly half of our residents, of the 2 million residents, are covered by Kaiser and Sutter. But because of variability in getting that vaccine to different, either the county, or any of the other healthcare providers, it's been a little difficult at times. And so this is basically saying, as long as you qualify based upon the current county/state rules, as far as you're 65 and older, any resident can go to any of those and set up an appointment. And we'll be talking. There was a meeting last night I had a meeting last night with a town hall with County Supervisor Simidian and Lee to talk about vaccine distribution, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the details of that a little bit later. Sunday, of course, was Super Bowl Sunday, so hopefully people weren't at any parties, weren't out celebrating, and staying at home, being safe. Congratulations to Tampa Bay Buccaneers if you watched the game. I actually probably spent more time watching the Puppy Bowl than I did watching the Super Bowl, other than a few commercials during last Sunday. And then moving on to Monday. On Monday, Governor Newsom was at Petco Stadium in San Diego. And he spent actually a lot of the week visiting different locations around the state, pushing mass vaccinations. So he was at Petco Park on Monday. On Tuesday, the governor and the county supervisors met at Levi Stadium here in Santa Clara, and Al Guido, the president of the 49ers, was there, basically saying that we will be providing 5,000 and moving up to 15,000 vaccinations a day at that location, so at Levi Stadium. On Wednesday, the governor was in Fresno, so talking about adding a vaccination location there. I think he'll be probably next Tuesday in Oakland. I think the Oakland Arena is opening for vaccinations, and so my guess is he will be back in the Bay Area, I think on Monday or Tuesday of next week. And I think and hopefully this is one of the best things. Get the vaccination out through as many locations as possible, making it as easy as possible for people to get vaccinated if they want to get vaccinated, if they qualify for vaccinations. Definitely, there's been this vaccination press tour is partially, about the governor trying to show that vaccinations are moving forward, in response to the recall, and earlier this week, definitely I think Wednesday or so, it was announced that they will be hitting the 1.5 million signatures uh, required by the middle of March to put the recall on the ballot. So definitely Governor Newsom is trying to get that positive press out there after I'll say some missteps from the vaccination distribution standpoint. So this is his his kind of information to say, look, we're trying to get things in order from a state standpoint. So he's doing whatever he can to tamp down that call for recall. And actually on the Wednesday press conference in Fresno, there were chants about the recall while the press conference was going on. On Wednesday, and actually during the governor's press conference, but on Wednesday afternoon, the Santa Clara County Health and actually Santa Clara and Alameda had a joint press conference because the first two cases of the South African variant had been identified in California. And so it was basically, at least from a Santa Clara standpoint, it was from somebody who had returned from an international trip and been self-quarantined. And so the good thing was, they came back, they self-quarantined as is required by our county health order, and then got sick. They evaluated it and found out that yes, it was identified as the South African variant. So this is at risk. They're still trying to track down from an Alameda County standpoint. This is somebody who got sick, I think, in January and had already recovered, but they're still trying to track down and trace people that person come in contact with. There's been a lot of question as far as, the South African variant is more virulent and easier transmissible. So definitely there was a lot of concern, but it was only a matter of time in my mind that the variants have spread to multiple locations around the U.S. It's just given a matter of time and looking at the matter of people that are being infected, people traveling, all of that. And then last night, I joined Supervisor Simidian and Supervisor Lee for a town hall, and Supervisor Joe Simidian, has been having basically setting up town halls on the COVID-19 vaccinations, and what was positive, so the first two this week were, I think, Los Altos and Los Altos Hills. Last night was Sunnyvale. Next week it'll be Mountain View, Palo Alto. So over the next few weeks, if you missed last night's, if you have questions, you can go to Supervisor Spinian's events page on his website, or take a look at my Facebook post from earlier this week to see his upcoming events. And I think it was positive because what the supervisor brought was representatives from Palo Alto Medical, Kaiser, Stanford, El Camino Health, and of course, the county, both county legal as well as, county health, to talk about, what their plans are for vaccinations, what their contact information is to get vaccinated, and all of them, some of them are better prepared right now as far as, having dedicated numbers to call in to request a vaccination appointment. Some of them are, so it's like from a county standpoint, I think is the most forward thinking right now. They have, if you have any questions, you can go to sccfreevax.org, and ultimately that will list, for all those different providers, what the current contact information is, what the current requirements are. So you can go there and get and set up your appointment if you qualify. And to remind you, everyone, it's like we're still in phase 1A and kind of phase 1B. So it's healthcare personnel, long-term care facility residents, and county residents 65 and older are the people that currently qualify based upon the state and of course the county order And there were a lot of questions, and I really appreciate Supervisor Simitian's candor, in answering questions that came up from residents. It's like, and definitely some suggestions, some questions about things to push back on the state. But it was pretty clear the state has been made it fairly clear that if you're not following the state order, as far as who gets vaccinated when, conceivably they will be reducing the amount of vaccinations that a specific county can get. So from that standpoint, it is really important to follow that state order as much as possible. But yeah, the supervisor will be having town halls for each city over the next few weeks. And so if you missed the first one, or if you want to get the latest information, because it is changing on a daily basis, weekly basis, daily basis, uh, you can attend one of the future ones. It has a really good thing about answering, typing in your questions, and the supervisor is really good about going through, um, answering the questions if possible online, or having his staff follow up. So it's right now much like this weekly office hour. It's getting information out there. It's answering people's questions. I think that's a big thing. People have so many questions on this ever-changing world of vaccinations, of COVID-19. It's getting that positive information out there on what the real answers are for what's going on. Let's go ahead and move to the health dashboard on testing, tracing, all that. From a California standpoint, we've now reached almost 3.4 million cases. California has had over 45,000 fatalities due to COVID-19. And then from a county standpoint, and number of new cases has trended down from from a state standpoint, and from a county standpoint. So from a county standpoint, we now have over 106,000 new cases, or COVID-19 cases. That's new cases of less than 3,000 from last week. And so we've seen a definite trending down, so it's less than 3,000 since last Friday. Before that, it was about 3,000. Weeks before that is 4,000, 7,000, 8,000, so 9,000. So we've seen a definitely trending down on a week-to-week basis as far as the number of new people that have been infected and tested positive for COVID-19. We've seen from a death count, we've had 1,624 deaths in the county. That's over 120 new deaths in the last week, but that's also trending down week over week. Last week we had, I think, about 150. And then we have currently 325 people hospitalized due to COVID-19. That's down from 413 last week, over 500 the week before, over 600 the week before that. So even the number of people in the hospital is trending, steadily downward week after week. And then by cities, San Jose now has surpassed 70,000 cases, but they've only had additional 1,200 in the last week. That's down from 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, stepping back for multiple weeks. And then Sunnyvale, we've had 4,900 cases. That's only about 150 in the last week, and that's also trending down for, we've had 200s to 400s and stepping back in multiple weeks. So as for me, I continue to do, a lot of advocating on your behalf, mainly at the county level, some at the state level, and the federal level. From a federal level, it's trying to get as much in the basically the next package, the care package that's coming from the federal government. The 1.9 trillion that has been proposed and is currently being negotiated within Congress. So I've been, dealing with as much possible of trying to make sure that our city gets as much of that aid as possible. We got none of the aid from the the last May relief package. And so hopefully this one will give direct aid to our cities that we can then, help defer some of the costs that we incurred last year, as well as, conceivably fund additional programs, with rent, with, the small business loan program that we had last year, hopefully to get enough aid that we can actually start looking at doing more of that, that based upon that aid that we get from the federal government. In talking to the county, from a testing standpoint, the mobile county pop-up van was at Murphy Park this past Monday, and they're there, the second and fourth Monday from 9:30 to 4 p.m. And so it was here on the 8th. It'll be back here on the 22nd, and those reservations start basically a week ahead of time. So this coming Monday, you can start, reserving your appointment, and you just need to go to SCC free test.org, and you can find out more information on, how to get tested at Murphy Park, as well as far as all the different locations in the county that the county operates to get tested. Next, I wanted to update you on some upcoming events. So there's basically 2 big council meetings left before the end of the month. The first is on February 23rd, and so that has multiple things. First will be, and that's actually a fairly full evening, but we'll be awarding the franchise for collection of our solid waste recyclables and organic materials. And so that's going to be a big discussion on, and there's been negotiations and updates to council over the last year, but it's setting up that franchise organization, or that franchise agreement between us and our basically solid waste recyclable business that basically collects your garbage every week. But it's also looking at making sure that, like, the food cycle program also moves to multifamily. It's rollout of a lot of things that are part of our climate action plan. And so it's important that's also part of that agreement, to make sure that we're meeting, our waste goals, and making sure that, conceivably food from the food cycle, that we're diverting as much food as possible from the landfill. So that's also part of that program. We'll be dealing with the redistricting ordinance. So we gave a lot of direction to staff at the last meeting, and now, staff will come up with a draft ordinance, and we'll start doing some wordsmithing around that ordinance. And then finally, we will authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement with our city forest on planting trees on homeowners' private properties. And so there's a budget modification for that. For my standpoint, is trying to get as many trees into the community as possible. And so this is a nonprofit. It's helping to fund a partnership with a nonprofit. If people are willing to basically adopt a tree on their property, making sure that it gets watered, making sure that, there's a lot of locations that have lost their trees over the years, and try to get more trees in the community. I think, being as green as possible is in everyone's interest. And then council will also have an all-day study issue and budget issue workshop on Thursday, February 25th. And that's an all-day meeting starting at 8:30 a.m. And this is, to go through, much like our strategic session, to go through the 30 new study issues that came up over the last year. And so we have around 17 study issues. And what council does on a yearly basis is we propose ideas, as well as our boards and commission propose new ideas, and those are written up as study issues, and then we end up ranking them. We discuss them. We figure out what the appropriate ranking is, and then ultimately when the budget comes back, it's figuring out which ones above and below the line are able to be staffed on the current budget and staffing, and whether or not council wants to add additional budget to fund a specific idea. And so ultimately providing core services to our residents is the main goal. It's getting, your trash picked up, making sure that the streets are cleaned and the roads are paved. All that functionality that's critical, the sewage system works, is our core functionality for our city. But these study issues are looking at new ideas, new proposals, new things that our city could do. And so from that standpoint, I think it's a positive thing to go through every year and look at what we can do possibly in the upcoming year. And so it'll be going through those 30 study issues that we currently have, and discussing them at a council level. And then on Tuesdays to the beginning of March, March 2nd, is the third of those Moffett Park specific plan meetings. So if you go to moffatparksp.com, you can find out more information, how to sign up, how to get more information. But the third meeting is on market conditions, on land use, housing, and open space. And so, to me, I think this is kind of where the first two meetings feed into this. How, what's an actual vision for what could be done in Moffett Park? What residents are interested in seeing? I mentioned it last meeting, but I wanted to remind people, there's the business bike rack program for businesses, and so that's now live. So one of the things that we funded with last year's budget modifications, so one of the things that I was really happy to do is duplicate a program that is currently happening in San Jose. So what the city does is basically fund putting in a bike rack for a business that wants to sponsor it. So a business, and there's lots of, I'll say, small businesses, around the city, strip malls, that don't have bike racks, so that if people bike there, they have to basically, lock their bike to a signpost or a pole. What this program does is if a business says, okay, I'll sponsor it, so the landlord agrees, then the city will come in, purchase that bike rack, do an install, and as long as in the long run that landlord, that resident, ends up doing all the upkeep. So for me, that's actually fairly good. It's a fairly good program, and we'll see if you have a business or property owner that might be interested. Please take a look at the city website and search for bike rack. And I think this could be very positive. It gets people more into the habit of active transportation, being able to bike to wherever they want in the city, and making sure that a place that currently doesn't have a bike rack has a bike rack, and people feel a little bit safer about taking their bike to that location. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the weekly questions. Last week, Brooke asked, will a mass vaccination site open in Santa Clara County, or are there plans to do pop-up or mobile sites? Yes and yes. So of course, Levi's Stadium just opened on Tuesday for vaccinations, and then pop-ups. The county is currently doing pop-up vaccinations, mainly in the east and south part of the county right now, mainly in some of the hardest hit locations for COVID-19. So where the biggest transmission rates are currently, they're kind of focusing on trying to get the pop-up van in those locations. I'm working, trying to get vaccinations within our city too. But of course, the healthcare providers are also providing that. All the ones I listed previously. I'm looking at talking to several of the high-tech companies that are looking at doing that on their location. So hopefully more positive information happens soon as far as that's concerned. Kenny asked, will Murphy Avenue be closed permanently to car traffic? And I think, I talked to the Sunnyvale Downtown Association earlier this week, and about 2 weeks ago, Murphy Avenue was closed again to only be pedestrian and bike traffic. So alfresco dining is now allowed again. And in general, the businesses have all been very positive, looking at, providing that long-term agreement between the downtown and the city if it's permanently closed. And so that's being evaluated right now. But I think, the positive thing is, most restaurants, most residents are finally in agreement that having a pedestrian zone in historic Murphy Avenue would only be better for the city in the long run. Several people asked what's happening with Fair Oaks Park unhoused. There's been lots of reports of the homeless being swept, and will they ultimately be housed? So, I continue to spend a lot of time on this issue, uh, and so, I took, when Supervisor Lee was elected, that was one of the issues that we talked about. I took the idea of adding tiny homes as transitionary housing next to our all year-round shelter on Hamlin. And so he and his staff are currently working on that. Supervisor Chavez and Supervisor Lee had a press conference earlier this week for a group of tiny homes that were just opened in San Jose, funded between mainly the county, San Jose, and some state funding. So I think something similar to that could be done in the parking lot of the Hamlin shelter here in Sunnyvale, and I think that would be a very positive thing, especially for some of the families that are at that shelter. And so I've been seeing positive results from the county of expanding that shelter from 125 to 175 beds, as well as moving that year round. That's one of the things that I pushed Supervisor Cortese on when he was still supervisor, now Senator Cortese, when we first met several years ago. And so that's been positive movement as far as that Hamlin shelter. But conceivably adding tiny homes would allow some of the families, and there's it's not just single people there. There's couples, and there's families with children at the Hamlin shelter, and so giving them a little bit more privacy would actually be positive, I think, in the long run. And as far as the tiny homes that opened up in San Jose earlier this week, that's being run by the county, those were basically for families. So I think that's very positive. As far as the Fair Oaks unhoused, the city's actually made very good progress, and they're very close to the final agreements for, a safe sheltering plan with the various partners involved. Once the details have been finalized, then nonprofit staff will share that information with the unhoused residents. But there's also been a lot of misinformation that that encampment has been swept by the police, and that has not happened. I've had multiple reports over the last few months about that. It's definitely that's happened in San Jose. That hasn't happened in Sunnyvale. But we're looking at housing, and it's a complex issue. It's not just putting. And we've been working with the county, but those nonprofit partners have really made a difference. And we've been looking at this since the fall. But it's not just putting people into shelters or hotels. It's safely processing and storing their possessions. But most importantly, it's getting the county to provide long-term services, or funding somebody to do long-term services, providing food, providing health care, all that, which I think is critical. Another question Molly asked several weeks ago. One question on everyone's mind during these trying times is, when is Dunkin' Donuts opening? So the good thing is Dunkin' Donuts put up its hiring sign about 2 weeks ago, and I've heard unofficially that it might be open by the end of next week. So it's always good to have a new business opening up in Sunnyvale. So more information as far as that's concerned. George asked, now that the latest downtown Sunnyvale development project has made it through Planning Commission, what can you tell us about the next 3 projects for that area? And so we talked a little bit last week about the office building that will go along Washington. that will basically have retail all along Washington, along Murphy, along TAFE, and then there'll be a plaza as Francis goes south towards Redwood Square. So all that is looking very good. But yeah, from a first floor standpoint, it's all retail, and then you'll have office above. And then just this week, one of the locations, the old post office and the apartments next to it, they started tearing basically they started deconstruction of those buildings, so tearing those buildings down, and that's ultimately going to be office building with basically a big first floor kind of retail open space that I think looks very positive from what I saw from the plans from last year. And then the last big project is the parking lot next to Murphy Square, so right at Sunnyvale and Evelyn, and that's also going to be another office building, but it'd be duplicating, at least from what I saw, the architecture of Murphy Square itself. So those kind of a quick overview of what's going on for those different those kind of three major downtown developments. And there's other city line developments looking at the next phase, other retail, other housing, but that we'll see where that goes. Garrick Chan asked, what is the possibility of Sunnyvale distributing 3M, basically personal protection systems to each Sunnyvale resident? So ultimately, conceivably that we could expend that money. And I've heard actually from a federal standpoint that conceivably that will be done at a federal level. But if you need a mask and there's different, the different levels of mask availability or quality. But so I have a KNR 95 mask. I have standard, cloth masks. All those are positive, but it's just making sure that you wear your mask. Double masking is important, but I've also heard from a federal standpoint that they're actually, evaluating sending masks to everyone. So we'll evaluate it. I'll bring it up with the city manager to see, how viable, how much it would cost would be from a city standpoint. So South Bay and Antifa ask, why has Sunnyvale decided intimidation is the best tactic for handling protests? So I don't think that we've been, from our standpoint, intimidating. We've had multiple protests that happened in the city. Definitely the police have been by and watching. Definitely, there was a protest about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, that did start getting out of hand. And so, it was, we allow lawful protests, we allow marching in the streets. That protest started graffitiing and more and worse yet, pepper spraying, in residents or people that were downtown. So once it starts becoming a non-peaceful protest, that's when, the police do have to take action. That being said, we've had multiple protests. There was a protest 3 weeks ago that I think was just mainly at the community center. But I don't see, our police doing intimidation. I think they have been watching and they have been, protecting our residents when there have been confrontations. So no arrests happened. They basically, the police, the public safety announced that had become, and the city manager and the chief decided that it was an unlawful protest at that point, and those protesters dispersed. Pamela asked, we keep starting new projects, but what about finishing and building the buildings behind Target? So So that project is actually moving forward. The so there's next to Target, there's multiple projects. Um, the one um, the one is an apartment building, and so that apartment building also has 12.5% below market rate apartments that'll be part of it. So that's along Iowa. So that's one of the next projects that will be there. But past that point, there's a vision for condos that will go along Iowa, south of Target, south of the new parking structure. So kind of wrapping that parking structure facing Iowa, facing Sunnyvale, and so that's part of the next plan of adding additional housing. That would be done only after the current apartment complex at Iowa and TAFE is actually completed. Let's see. Yeah, so and George asked, has there been an evaluation of the always-on pedestrian lights downtown and how well that has worked? There's been somewhat of an evaluation, and I've talked this over with the city manager multiple times. You know, it's been positive. There is you know, if you do it too much. So this was the question of, as we did that, if we expand it beyond that community, uh, at a certain point, cars will start running red lights. You know, if they have to wait too long, and so, but in general, it's been seen as a positive thing. Uh, but I do see, you know, once we get through COVID, it'll go back to the way it was before, mainly because, you know, it's like to stop cars for no reason and having them idle at a stoplight doesn't really make sense. It's like definitely prioritizing pedestrians makes sense, but you know, and I still see, you know, people pushing the crosswalk button with their elbows. You know, that was the way it was before we decided to automate the majority of the major intersections where pedestrians are crossing downtown. And I think it's been a positive thing that it's just made one less thing for people, one other place where people don't have to touch and conceivably have issues as far as that's concerned. Um, let's see, any other questions? I think that's about it. Let's go ahead and wrap up just a little bit earlier this week. You know, thanks again for joining me again this week. And as always, I just want to say I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. I know life continues to be difficult for all of us. New issues come up every week, but your actions, your response, really do make a difference. So you know, continue to wear your mask. You know, help your neighbors, share baked goods, share fruit picked from your trees. You know, continue to build community and help others, especially during these times. I'm really proud to see Sunnyvale residents pulling together to help those in need. You know, helping your neighbors, helping strangers. If you're out on a walk, wave, say hello. People miss that social interaction, and you know, Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We are in this together. We will get through this together. Thanks for listening. Please have a fantastic Valentine's Day. And until next week, you know, wear your mask and take care. Stay safe. Okay, see ya. Bye.